The air in my own home felt wrong, heavy, like a storm waiting to break. I stood in the hallway clutching a tray of freshly baked cookies, their warmth seeping into my palms, but no one looked up. Not Ethan, not Sophie, not even Ryan. Their laughter filled the room, but it wasn't for me. I was invisible. And then Sophie's voice cut through, sharp as a blade. "Lillian, you don't need to be here." My heart froze. Did they really think they could erase me from the life I'd built? I stayed silent, not out of weakness, but because I was watching, waiting. Welcome to the Betrayal Revenge channel, where stories come alive through voices you've never heard told this way before. Every tale is a journey of survival, and we're honored to share this one with you. It all began 6 months ago, in the sprawling suburban villa I'd poured my heart into for decades. There was something off about the house that morning, though I couldn't pinpoint it at first. The chandelier in the dining room cast its usual golden glow, but the light felt colder, sharper, like it was slicing through the air rather than warming it. The smell of coffee lingered, mixed with the faint floral perfume Sophie always wore, a scent that had invaded every corner of my home since she arrived. I stood at the kitchen counter, my hands dusted with flour, kneading dough for the bread Ethan loved. My fingers worked on instinct, but my mind was elsewhere, snagged on a question I couldn't shake. When did I become a stranger in my own life? I used to be the heart of this family. For years, I was the one who held us together. When Ethan's business faltered, I balanced the books, stretched every dollar, and kept the lights on. When Ryan was a boy, I was the one who bandaged his scraped knees, read him stories, and cheered at his soccer games. This villa, every brick, every polished floor, was a testament to my sacrifices. I'd chosen the drapes, planted the roses in the garden, and hung the family photos that lined the staircase. This was my home. So why did it feel like I no longer belonged? It started when Ethan remarried. Sophie swept into our lives like a sudden gust, all charm and confidence, her laughter bright and relentless. At first I tried to welcome her. I invited her to tea, showed her the garden, even shared my recipes, but her smiles never reached her eyes. "Oh, Lillian," she'd say, her voice syrupy, "you're so traditional." The word stung, like a polite slap. Ethan didn't notice. He was too busy basking in her glow, his eyes following her every move. And Ryan, my stepson, the boy I'd raised as my own, started slipping away too. He'd always been distant, but now he barely spoke to me. Instead, he gravitated towards Sophie, laughing at her jokes, siding with her in every conversation. I pushed the dough aside and wiped my hands on my apron, the fabric worn thin from years of use. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, each second a reminder of how quiet the house had become when I was alone. I glanced at the dining room where Ethan, Sophie, and Ryan sat around the table, their voices overlapping in easy chatter. A family portrait, but one I wasn't part of. I carried the tray of cookies I'd baked, oatmeal raisin, Ryan's favorite from childhood, and set it on the table. No one looked up. Sophie was telling a story, her hands animated, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Ethan chuckled, and Ryan nodded along, his phone forgotten for once. I cleared my throat softly. "I thought you might like a snack," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. Sophie's eyes flicked to the tray, then back to Ethan. "Oh, Lillian, you're always so busy in that kitchen," she said, her tone light but edged with something I couldn't quite name. "We're fine, really. We're just catching up." She smiled, but it felt like a door closing. Ethan didn't even glance at me. Ryan reached for a cookie, then stopped when Sophie raised an eyebrow. "I'm good, Lillian," he mumbled, his eyes darting away. I stood there, the tray heavy in my hands, the warmth of the cookies fading against my skin. My chest tightened, a dull ache spreading. Was this how it felt to be erased? I forced a smile, murmured something about checking the laundry, and retreated to the kitchen. The sink was full of dishes from breakfast, dishes I hadn't eaten from but would wash anyway. As I scrubbed, the clink of porcelain drowned out their laughter, but not the thoughts swirling in my head. I kept replaying Sophie's words, her dismissive tone. I kept seeing Ethan's indifference, Ryan's avoidance. and I kept wondering, what had I done to deserve this? Later that evening, I sat in the living room, a cup of chamomile tea cooling in my hands. The villa was quiet now, the others upstairs. The fireplace glowed faintly, casting shadows across the walls. I traced the rim of my cup, my mind drifting to the past. I remembered the day we moved into this house, how Ethan had carried me over the threshold, both of us laughing like newlyweds. I remembered Ryan's first steps in the backyard, his tiny hands clutching my fingers. Those memories felt like relics now, buried under the weight of Sophie's presence. My phone buzzed, pulling me back. It was Martha, my oldest friend, the one person who hadn't drifted away. "Lillian, you free tomorrow?" her text read. "Coffee at our usual spot?" A small smile tugged at my lips. Martha was a lifeline, the only one who still saw me. I typed a quick reply, then set the phone down. As I did, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Sophie appeared, her silk robe swishing softly. She paused when she saw me, her expression unreadable. "Lillian," she said, her voice low, "you don't need to stay up so late. We're all fine." She didn't wait for a response, just glided toward the kitchen, her perfume trailing behind her. I stared at the empty doorway, my grip tightening on the cup. Her words echoed in my mind, each one a subtle push, a nudge toward the edges of my own life. The dining room was suffocating, the air thick with Sophie's perfume and the weight of her words. She leaned across the table, her eyes glinting like polished glass, and said, "Lillian, this house doesn't need two queens." My fork froze midair, the metal cold against my fingers. Ethan looked away, silent. Ryan smirked. They were all against me, and I was cornered in the home I'd built. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't ready to surrender. I didn't speak, not because I was afraid, but because I was counting their moves. It was a week after that quiet night in the living room, on a crisp morning that carried the sharp scent of autumn. Something was wrong in the house again, but this time I could feel it in my bones. The villa was too quiet, the kind of quiet that hums with unspoken tension. I stood in the kitchen slicing apples for a pie, the knife's rhythm steady against the cutting board. The morning light streamed through the window, painting the counter in soft gold, but it did little to warm the chill settling in my chest. I kept thinking about Sophie's words from last week, "You don't need to stay up so late," and the way her eyes had lingered, as if she were measuring me. What was she planning? The past few days had been a blur of small slights, each one sharper than the last. Sophie's comments had grown bolder, her tone less veiled. "Lillian, you're always hovering," she'd said yesterday, waving a manicured hand as if I were a fly to be swatted. Ethan had nodded absently, his attention fixed on his phone. Ryan, lounging on the couch, had chuckled under his breath. I'd swallowed my anger, forcing a smile, but it was getting harder to keep the mask in place. I wasn't just fading anymore. I was being pushed. I arranged the apple slices in a bowl, their tart scent mingling with the cinnamon I'd sprinkled. The pie was for dinner, a tradition I'd kept for years. I used to love these moments, preparing meals that brought the family together, but now the dining table felt like a battlefield. As I worked, the front door creaked open, and Sophie's voice floated in, bright and commanding. "Ethan, you won't believe what I found for the garden," she called. I heard his low chuckle, then Ryan's voice joining in, eager and animated. The three of them moved into the dining room, their conversation a lively hum that excluded me. I wiped my hands on my apron and carried the bowl of apples to the table, hoping to join them. But the moment I stepped into the room, the air shifted. Sophie's smile tightened, her eyes flicking to me like I'd interrupted something sacred. Ethan glanced up, then back at his coffee. Ryan didn't even bother looking. I set the bowl down, the clink of glass against wood louder than I intended. "I'm making pie for tonight," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "Thought you might like some." Sophie tilted her head, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Lillian, you're so dedicated," she said, the word dripping with something close to mockery. "But honestly, we're fine. We've been ordering takeout lately. It's easier." Her gaze slid to Ethan, who nodded faintly, still absorbed in his cup. Ryan snorted, muttering, "Yeah, no need for all that effort." I stood there, the bowl still warm under my fingertips, my pulse quickening. Easier? I'd spent decades cooking for this family, learning their tastes, perfecting every recipe. And now my efforts were effort? I forced myself to breathe, to keep my voice calm. I enjoy it, I said, meeting Sophie's gaze. It's for all of us. Sophie leaned back in her chair, her bracelet glinting as she crossed her arms. Lillian, she said, her voice suddenly sharp. Let's be honest. You don't need to keep playing the martyr. This house doesn't need you slaving away in the kitchen. We're managing just fine. Her words landed like a slap, each one deliberate, meant to sting. I looked at Ethan, waiting for him to say something, anything, but he just sat there, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the table. Ryan shifted in his seat, a smirk tugging at his lips. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. My hands trembled, but I clenched them into fists, hidden beneath my apron. Was this really happening? I wanted to snap back, to remind them who'd kept this family afloat, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I said, I'm not a martyr, Sophie. I'm just doing what I've always done. My voice was quieter than I wanted, but it held steady. Sophie's smile widened, predatory now. Exactly, she said, leaning forward. You've always done it. But things change, Lillian. This isn't your stage anymore. Maybe it's time you stepped back. She paused, letting the words sink in. You could move out, find a little place of your own. We'd manage here without you. The room went still. My heart pounded, a dull roar in my ears. Move out? This was my home, the place I'd built brick by brick, the sanctuary I'd created for all of us. And she was suggesting, no, demanding that I leave? I looked at Ethan again, my eyes pleading for him to speak, to defend me. But he just rubbed his temple, his silence louder than any words. Ryan's smirk grew, his eyes glinting with amusement. They were all in on it, a united front against me. I felt the weight of their stares, the air thick with expectation. They wanted me to crumble, to agree, to slink away quietly. But something inside me hardened, a spark of defiance flickering to life. I straightened, my voice low but firm. This is my home, Sophie. I'm not going anywhere. Her smile faltered just for a second, but it was enough to tell me I'd hit a nerve. She opened her mouth to respond, but Ethan finally spoke, his voice gruff. Let's not make this a scene, he said, still not looking at me. We're just talking, Lillian. Just talking? His words were a betrayal, a confirmation that he was on her side, not mine. I turned and walked back to the kitchen, my steps measured, my hands still trembling. The scent of apples and cinnamon followed me, but it felt sour now, tainted. I leaned against the counter, staring at the half-finished pie crust, my mind racing. Sophie's ultimatum echoed in my head, each word a nail in the coffin of the life I'd known. Move out, step back. She thought she could push me out, that I'd fade away without a fight, but she didn't know me, not really. The front door clicked shut behind me, the sound sharp and final, like a chapter slamming closed. I stood on the porch of the villa I'd built, my suitcase at my feet, the weight of Sophie's ultimatum pressing against my chest. Leave, she'd said, and Ethan hadn't stopped her. Ryan's silence had cut deeper than any words. I was alone now, cast out. But as the wind brushed my face, a strange calm settled in. Was this the end, or a beginning I hadn't dared to imagine? I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurting, but because I was choosing to move forward. It was the morning after Sophie's demand, under a gray sky heavy with the promise of rain. The air smelled of damp earth and impending rain as I stood in my bedroom, folding clothes with hands that moved on instinct. The villa was quiet, save for the faint creak of the floorboards and the distant hum of a lawnmower outside. My suitcase lay open on the bed, a worn leather relic from years past, its edges frayed like my nerves. I packed lightly, a few blouses, a pair of slacks, my favorite scarf, the one Martha had given me for my 50th birthday. Each item felt heavier than it should, as if I were packing away pieces of myself. How had it come to this? Sophie's words from yesterday still burned in my mind. Find a little place of your own. Ethan's silence had sealed the deal, and Ryan's smirk had been the final blow. I'd lain awake all night staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every slight. I'd built this home. Every rose in the garden, every curtain in the windows bore my touch. Yet here I was, preparing to leave it behind. The injustice of it clawed at me, but beneath the anger, a quieter voice whispered, "Maybe this is your chance to break free." I zipped the suitcase shut and ran my fingers over its handle, the leather cool and smooth. The room felt smaller now, the walls crowded with memories. The bedside table held a photo of me and Ethan from our early days, both of us smiling in the villa's garden. I hesitated, then left it where it was. I didn't need reminders of a life that no longer belonged to me. Instead, I slipped my wedding ring off and placed it in a drawer, the soft clink echoing in the silence. It felt like shedding a skin. Downstairs, the dining room was empty, the table still cluttered with last night's dishes. I'd meant to clean them, but now what was the point? Sophie would probably hire someone to replace me, just as she'd replaced me in Ethan's heart. I walked to the front door, my footsteps loud in the stillness, and paused to glance at the staircase. Part of me hoped Ethan would appear, that he'd beg me to stay, that he'd see me again. But the house stayed silent, and I knew better than to wait for miracles. Outside, the air was crisp, the sky a heavy gray that mirrored my mood. I set my suitcase on the porch and sat on the steps, the stone cold through my coat. The villa loomed behind me, its windows dark, like eyes watching me go. I thought of the years I'd spent here, the laughter, the fights, the quiet moments that had stitched our family together. Now, it felt like a museum of someone else's life. Could I really walk away from it all? My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Martha, her name a small beacon in the fog. "I'm here," her text read. Moments later, her familiar red sedan pulled into the driveway, the engine's hum a comforting sound. She stepped out, her silver hair catching the faint light, her face creasing with concern as she saw me. "Lillian," she said, her voice warm but firm, "you look like you're carrying the world. Come here." I stood, my throat tight, and let her pull me into a hug. Her coat smelled of lavender and coffee, grounding me. "I'm leaving, Martha," I said, the words rough, barely above a whisper. "They want me gone." She pulled back, her eyes searching mine. "They don't deserve you," she said, her tone fierce. "Not Ethan, not Sophie, not even Ryan. You've given them everything, and they've given you nothing but grief." She gestured to the villa, its grandeur now a hollow shell. "This place doesn't own you, Lillian. You're more than their maid, their cook, their prop." Her words stung, but they also sparked something, a flicker of resolve I hadn't felt in years. I nodded, wiping at the corner of my eye before a tear could fall. "I don't know where to go," I admitted, my voice small. "I just know I can't stay." Martha's face softened, and she squeezed my arm. "Then don't stay," she said. "You've spent your life living for them. Now live for you. Go somewhere. Anywhere. See the world. You've always talked about Europe, those little cafes in Paris, the canals in Venice. Why not now?" She grinned, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "You're not dead, Lillian. You're just starting." I laughed, a shaky sound that felt foreign in my throat. Europe. The idea was absurd, extravagant, something I dreamed of in fleeting moments but never dared pursue. Yet the thought of it, cobblestone streets, the scent of fresh croissants, the freedom to be me, lit a spark in my chest. Could I really do this? I looked at the villa, its shadow stretching across the lawn, and felt a weight lift. Maybe leaving wasn't defeat. Maybe it was defiance. "All right," I said, my voice steadier now. "I'll go, I'll figure it out." Martha clapped her hands, her smile wide. "That's my girl," she said. "Let's get you out of here. I'll drive you to my place and we'll plan your escape." The cafe in Paris smelled of butter and dreams, the kind I'd buried long ago. I sat by the window, a stranger in a city that didn't know my name, my fingers tracing the rim of a porcelain cup. For the first time in decades, I wasn't cooking, cleaning, or waiting for someone else's approval. I was just me. But as laughter spilled from the street, a shadow crept into my heart. Could I really outrun the pain I'd left behind? I sipped my coffee, not to drown the ache, but to savor the moment I'd claimed for myself. It was 2 weeks after I left the villa, on a golden morning in Paris that felt like a painting come to life. The air in Paris carried the scent of fresh baguettes and blooming jasmine, a fragrance that seemed to weave itself into the cobblestone streets. I sat at a small outdoor cafe, its wrought iron chairs cool against my skin, a cup of café au lait steaming before me. The morning sun spilled over the rooftops, gilding the city in a soft, forgiving light. Around me, Parisians moved with effortless grace, women in tailored coats, men with scarves tossed carelessly over their shoulders, their voices a melodic hum. I was a stranger here, an outsider, and yet for the first time in years I felt like I belonged. Was this what freedom tasted like? I'd left the villa behind, its heavy silence and Sophie's sharp words fading with each mile I put between us. Martha had been right. Europe was my escape, my rebellion against a life that had tried to erase me. I'd booked the trip on a whim, spurred by her encouragement, choosing a luxurious tour that promised Paris, Florence, and Venice. The cost had made me pause. Decades of pinching pennies had wired me for caution, but then I'd thought of Ethan's indifference, Ryan's smirk, Sophie's ultimatum. Why shouldn't I spend my savings on myself? So I'd signed up, packed my suitcase, and boarded a plane, the hum of the engines drowning out the doubts in my head. Now, here I was, in a city I'd only dreamed of. The cafe's windows reflected the bustle of the street, vendors arranging flowers, a street musician coaxing a wistful tune from his violin. I sipped my coffee, its bitterness softened by warm milk, and let my eyes wander. My reflection stared back from the glass, and I barely recognized her. The woman in the villa had worn faded aprons and tired eyes. This woman wore a silk scarf and a tentative smile. I touched the scarf, its fabric smooth under my fingertips, a gift I'd bought myself at a boutique yesterday. It was emerald green, bold, nothing like the muted colors I'd worn for years to blend into the background. My thoughts drifted to the past, unbidden but vivid. I remembered the kitchen in the villa, its counters cluttered with ingredients, the air thick with the scent of baking bread. I'd spent so many hours there, chopping, stirring, serving, all for a family that barely noticed. Once, years ago, I'd suggested to Ethan that we take a trip, maybe to Europe. He'd laughed, not unkindly, and said, "Lillian, we've got a good life here. Why chase fantasies?" I'd nodded, swallowing my disappointment, and returned to my duties. That memory stung now, a reminder of how small I'd let my world become. Why had I settled for so little? I pushed the thought away and opened the leather-bound journal I'd bought at the airport. Its pages were still crisp, waiting to be filled. I'd started writing on the plane, fragments of thoughts, memories, dreams I hadn't dared voice. Now I uncapped my pen and wrote, "Today I am not a wife, not a mother, not a housekeeper. I am Lillian, and I am enough." The words felt fragile, like they might dissolve if I stared too long, but they also felt true. I closed the journal, my heart a little lighter. The tour group was small, a mix of retirees and solo travelers, each with their own stories. Yesterday, we'd wandered the Louvre, its halls echoing with the weight of history. I'd stood before the Mona Lisa, her enigmatic smile stirring something in me, a sense of mystery, of secrets held close. I'd lingered longer than the others, lost in thought, until a woman from the group, Clara, had nudged me. "You look like you're unraveling a puzzle," she'd said, her Australian accent warm. I'd smiled, unsure how to explain that I was unraveling myself. Today the group was exploring Montmartre, but I'd slipped away to this cafe craving solitude. I ordered a croissant, its golden flakes scattering as I tore it apart. The buttery richness melted on my tongue, and I closed my eyes, savoring it. In the villa, I'd have baked dozens of these for others, never stopping to taste one myself. Now, each bite felt like a small act of defiance. I watched a couple at a nearby table, their hands intertwined, their laughter soft. A pang of loneliness hit me, sharp and unexpected. I missed the idea of family, the warmth I'd once believed we had. But then I remembered Ethan's silence, Sophie's cruelty, Ryan's betrayal. They didn't miss me. Why should I miss them? I paid the bill, leaving a generous tip, and stepped onto the street. The air was cool, the sun now higher, casting long shadows. I wandered toward the Seine, its waters glinting like a ribbon of silver. Tourists snapped photos, their voices a cheerful cacophony. I stopped at a bridge, leaning against the railing, the stone rough under my palms. The river flowed steadily below, indifferent to my turmoil. I thought of Martha's words. Live for you. She'd texted me this morning, a photo of her garden with the caption, "You're blooming, Lillian, keep going." I smiled, warmth spreading through me. Martha saw me, truly saw me, in a way my family never had. As I walked, I passed a street artist sketching portraits. On impulse, I sat for one, the scratch of his pencil a soothing rhythm. When he handed me the drawing, I stared, startled. The woman on the page looked strong, her eyes bright with something like hope. "C'est vous," he said, grinning. "It's you." I thanked him, tucking the sketch into my bag, my heart pounding. I was changing, shedding the weight of the villa, of the woman who'd let herself fade. I bought a glass of wine at a riverside stall, its ruby glow catching the light. I sipped it slowly, the tartness sharp and alive on my tongue. For the first time, I wasn't drinking to forget but to celebrate. But as the day waned, a shadow crept in. My phone buzzed and I glanced at the screen expecting Martha. Instead, it was a message from Sophie. "Lillian, we should talk. Come home." The words were polite, almost kind, but they sent a chill through me. Home? The villa wasn't my home anymore, not after they'd pushed me out. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Why was she reaching out now? What did she want? I slipped the phone back into my pocket, unresolved, the wine suddenly bitter in my mouth. The key wouldn't turn. I stood at the villa's front door, my suitcase at my feet, the brass lock gleaming like a taunt. My home, had shut me out. Inside, I heard Sophie's laughter, bright and cruel, as if she'd already claimed everything I'd built. My hands shook, not with fear, but with a fury I hadn't known I could feel. They thought they could erase me, but they had no idea what I was capable of. I didn't knock, not to beg, but to plan my next move. It was a month after I'd left for Europe, on a chilly evening that smelled of wood smoke and betrayal. The villa loomed before me, its stone facade bathed in the fading light of dusk. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves and the faint tang of chimney smoke from a neighbor's house. I stood on the porch, my suitcase at my side, its wheels still dusted with the grit of Parisian streets. My heart thumped, a mix of anticipation and dread as I reached for the front door key. I'd been gone for weeks, chasing freedom in Europe, but Sophie's cryptic message, "Come home," had pulled me back. I wasn't sure why I'd come, only that I needed to see the villa, to reclaim something I'd left behind. But what was waiting for me inside? I slid the key into the lock, expecting the familiar click. Instead, it jammed, the metal resisting with a stubborn grind. I frowned, twisting harder, but the key wouldn't budge. My pulse quickened. I tried again, jiggling it, my fingers growing clumsy in the cold. Nothing. The lock was new, its brass surface unscratched, mocking me with its shine. A chill ran through me, sharper than the autumn air. They changed the locks? My own home, the place I'd built with decades of sweat and love, had barred me out. I stepped back, my breath shallow, and pressed my ear to the door. From inside came the murmur of voices, then a burst of laughter, Sophie's high and triumphant, followed by Ryan's low chuckle. The sound hit me like a slap. They were in my living room laughing, while I stood outside like a stranger. My hands clenched, nails digging into my palms. I raised a fist to knock, then stopped. Knocking would be admitting defeat, begging for entry into my own home. Instead, I pulled out my phone and scrolled for a locksmith's number, my fingers trembling with a fury I could barely contain. As I waited, I paced the porch, the wood creaking under my boots. The villa's windows glowed warmly, casting rectangles of light onto the lawn. Through the curtains, I glimpsed movement. Sophie's silhouette, graceful and commanding, pouring wine into glasses. Ethan was there too, slouched in his armchair, and Ryan sprawled on the couch, his phone glowing in his hand. They looked like a family, a unit, complete without me. My chest tightened, a dull ache spreading. Had they planned this all along? I thought back to Europe, to the cafes in Paris, the canals of Venice, the moments I'd felt alive. I'd begun to rediscover myself, to see a woman who wasn't just a wife or a mother, but standing here, locked out of my own life. That freedom felt like a fleeting dream. Sophie's message replayed in my mind. We should talk. Talk about what? Her victory? My exile? I kicked at a pebble on the porch, its skitter across the stone a small release of the anger bubbling inside me. The locksmith arrived, a burly man with a toolbox that clanged as he walked. "Locked out, huh?" he said, his voice gruff but kind. I nodded, handing him the key. "This is my house," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "They changed the locks." He raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions, just set to work, his tools scraping against the lock. As he worked, I glanced at the garden, the roses I'd planted now wilting in the autumn chill. They looked as neglected as I felt, their petals curling inward like clenched fists. The lock clicked and the door swung open, revealing the foyer's polished wood and the faint scent of Sophie's floral perfume. The locksmith stepped back, wiping his hands. "All set," he said. "Want me to stick around?" I shook my head, thanking him, and handed over a tip from the euros still in my wallet. He nodded and left, his truck rumbling down the driveway. I stood at the threshold, my suitcase behind me, the open door a challenge. This is my home. They can't take it from me. I stepped inside, the warmth of the house enveloping me, but it felt wrong, like stepping into a stranger's space. The living room was just as I'd feared. Sophie stood by the fireplace, a glass of wine in hand, her silk blouse catching the light. Ethan sat in his armchair, his face tired but passive. Ryan lounged on the couch, his feet propped on the coffee table I'd refinished years ago. The family photos on the mantel, ones I'd framed, ones that included me, were gone, replaced by sleek candlesticks and a vase of lilies. My breath caught. They hadn't just locked me out, they'd erased me. Sophie turned, her smile freezing as she saw me. "Lillian," she said, her voice smooth but edged with surprise. "You're back." Her eyes flicked to the open door, then to my suitcase, calculating. Ethan shifted in his seat, his gaze dropping to the floor. Ryan sat up, his smirk fading, replaced by a flicker of unease. The room went quiet, the crackle of the fireplace the only sound. I set my suitcase down, the thud loud in the silence. "Why are the locks changed?" I asked, my voice low, each word deliberate. Sophie's smile tightened, but she didn't answer. Instead, she took a sip of wine, her movements slow, deliberate. "We needed better security," she said finally, her tone dismissive. "You were gone. We didn't know when or if you'd be back." I stared at her, my anger flaring. Security? This wasn't about security. It was about control. I looked at Ethan, willing him to speak, to acknowledge me, but he just rubbed his neck, his silence a betrayal all over again. Ryan cleared his throat, muttering, "Yeah, it's no big deal, Lillian." No big deal. They'd locked me out, stripped my home of my presence, and he called it no big deal? I took a step forward, my boots loud against the wood. "This is my house," I said, my voice rising, sharp with the weight of years of sacrifice. "You don't get to decide who comes and goes." Sophie's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, I turned to the mantel, my fingers brushing the spot where my photos used to be. "Where are they?" I asked, my voice trembling now, not with fear, but with rage. "The pictures, my things, where are they?" Sophie set her glass down, the clink sharp. "Lillian, don't make a scene," she said, her voice cold. "We redecorated. It's our home now. You left." Her words were a knife, twisting deeper with each syllable. Our home. As if I'd never existed, as if my decades here meant nothing. I turned to face her, my heart pounding, my hands clenched at my sides. The room felt smaller, the air thick with tension. Ethan finally looked up, his eyes weary but distant. Ryan shifted, his unease growing. Sophie stood her ground, her smile gone, her gaze challenging. They thought they'd won, that I'd slink away again, but they didn't know the fire they'd ignited in me. Sophie's smirk was a blade slicing through the air as she said, "This is our house now, Lillian. You're done here." I stood in my own living room, surrounded by strangers who'd stolen my home, my life, but then I reached into my bag, my fingers closing around a single sheet of paper. Their smug faces faltered as I held it up. They thought they'd won, but they didn't know the truth I'd kept hidden all along. I didn't flinch, not to gloat, but to reclaim what was mine. It was moments after I stepped back into the villa on that same chilly evening, with the weight of their betrayal heavy in the air. The living room felt like a stage, the fireplace's glow casting long shadows that danced across the walls. Sophie stood by the mantel, her wine glass glinting in her hand, her eyes locked on me with a predator's calm. Ethan slouched in his armchair, his face a mask of discomfort, while Ryan leaned forward on the couch, his earlier smirk replaced by a wary frown. The air was thick, charged with the tension of a storm about to break. I stood in the center of it all, my suitcase still by the door, my heart pounding but my resolve ironclad. They thought they could erase me, but they were about to learn who really owned this house. Sophie's words still hung in the air. "It's our home now. You left." Each syllable was a challenge, daring me to fight back. I met her gaze, my voice steady, despite the fury burning in my chest. "Your home?" I said, stepping closer, the wood floor creaking under my boots. "You changed the locks, threw out my things, and you think that makes this yours?" My eyes flicked to Ethan, searching for a flicker of guilt, but he just looked away, his fingers drumming nervously on the armrest. Ryan shifted, his unease palpable, but he said nothing. Sophie tilted her head, her smile sharp enough to cut. "Lillian, let's not be dramatic," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You walked away. You abandoned this family. We've moved on." She gestured around the room, her bracelet catching the firelight. "This place needed a fresh start. You don't belong here anymore." Her words were a calculated blow, meant to shatter me. But instead of breaking, I felt a surge of clarity, like the fog of years lifting. I took a slow breath, the scent of burning cedar grounding me. They didn't know. They didn't know the secret I'd carried, the truth I'd kept locked away. I reached into my bag, my fingers brushing past the journal from Paris, the scarf, until they closed around a folded document. The paper was crisp, its edges sharp, a silent ally. I held it up, my hand steady, and watched their faces shift. Sophie's smile faltering, Ethan's eyes narrowing, Ryan's mouth opening slightly. "What's that?" Sophie asked, her voice losing its edge, a crack in her armor. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I unfolded the document, the rustle loud in the silent room. It was the deed to the villa, its black ink stark against the page, my name printed in bold. Lillian Margaret Harper, sole owner. I'd inherited this house from my parents long before I met Ethan, before Ryan, before Sophie. It was mine, always had been, and I'd never signed it over. "This," I said, my voice low but unyielding, "is the deed to this house, my house." I held it out, letting Sophie see the words, the official seal. "You can change the locks, throw out my photos, redecorate every inch of this place, but it doesn't change the truth. I own this villa, not you, not Ethan, not Ryan, me." Sophie's face drained of color, her wine glass trembling in her hand. "That's impossible," she stammered, stepping forward as if to snatch the paper. I pulled it back, my eyes locked on hers. "It's very possible," I said. "This house was my parents' gift to me. I've paid every tax, every bill for decades. You have no claim here." I turned to Ethan, my voice sharper now. "Did you know, Ethan? Or did you just assume it was yours because you lived here?" Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to Sophie, then back to the floor. We thought, he mumbled, his voice trailing off. He didn't finish, but his silence said enough. He hadn't known or hadn't cared to check. Ryan stood, his hands shoved in his pockets, his earlier confidence gone. "Lillian, come on," he said, his tone almost pleading. "You can't just—" "I can," I cut him off, my voice rising, a fire I hadn't felt in years. "This is my home, Ryan. You turned your back on me, sided with her." I pointed at Sophie, who flinched. "And now you think you can keep what's mine? You're wrong." The room was silent, the crackle of the fire deafening. I felt their eyes on me, not with power now, but with shock, with fear. Sophie recovered first, her smile returning, though it was strained. "Lillian, be reasonable," she said, her voice syrupy again. "We're a family. We can work this out. You don't need to do this." Her words were a trap, meant to pull me back into the role of the compliant, invisible woman. But I wasn't that woman anymore. "Reasonable?" I said, stepping toward her, the deed still in my hand. "You locked me out, Sophie. You threw out my life like it was trash, and now you want to talk about family?" I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the room. "Get out, all of you. This is my house, and I want you gone." Sophie's eyes widened, her composure cracking. "You can't do this," she snapped, her voice rising. "We live here. You can't just—" She stopped, her words faltering as I held up the deed again, a silent reminder of my power. Ethan stood finally, his face a mix of anger and defeat. "Lillian," he said, his voice low, This is too much." But his words were weak, hollow, and he knew it. Ryan took a step toward Sophie, his loyalty clear, but his eyes were on me, uncertain. "Lillian, please," he said, his voice softer now. "Let's talk about this." I shook my head, my resolve unshaken. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "Pack your things. You're leaving." Sophie's face twisted, a flash of rage breaking through her mask. She grabbed her purse from the couch, her movements jerky, and stormed toward the door. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice venomous. "You'll regret this, Lillian." She yanked the door open, the night air rushing in, and disappeared into the darkness. Ethan hesitated, his eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment, a mix of shame and resignation. Then he followed her, his footsteps heavy. Ryan lingered, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came. He grabbed his jacket and left, the door slamming behind him. I stood alone in the living room, the deed still in my hand, the silence overwhelming. The villa felt different now, not warm, not home, but a battlefield I'd won. My heart raced, a mix of triumph and exhaustion. I walked to the mantel, my fingers brushing the empty space where my photos should have been. The lilies in the vase mocked me, their scent cloying. I knocked the vase over, the crash loud and satisfying, water pooling on the floor. The villa was mine again, but it felt like a hollow victory. I stood in the empty living room, the silence louder than Sophie's threats, Ethan's excuses, or Ryan's betrayal. They were gone, but so was the life I'd known. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with possibility. I'd reclaimed my home. Could I now rebuild myself? The answer lay in a single daring idea that sparked in my mind. I didn't linger in the past, not to mourn, but to forge a future. It was the morning after I'd driven them out, under a sky so clear it seemed to promise new beginnings. The villa was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a storm, clean, but heavy with the weight of what's been lost. I stood in the kitchen, sunlight streaming through the windows, glinting off the polished counters I'd scrubbed countless times. The air smelled of lemon cleaner and fresh coffee, a pot brewing on the counter, its gurgle the only sound in the house. My hands rested on the edge of the sink, the cool porcelain grounding me as I stared out at the garden. The roses I'd planted years ago were still there, their petals bright against the green, defiant despite their neglect. Could I be like them, survive, even thrive after being overlooked? Last night's confrontation replayed in my mind, Sophie's venomous exit, Ethan's defeated slump, Ryan's silent retreat. The deed had been my weapon, its truth undeniable, and they'd left without a fight. But victory didn't feel like I'd imagined. The villa was mine, yes, but it was also empty, its rooms echoing with memories of a family that no longer existed. I'd spent decades building this life for them, and now, standing in its ruins, I felt unmoored. What was I without their demands, their expectations? I poured a cup of coffee, the steam curling upward, and sat at the dining table. The chair creaked under me, a familiar sound that once meant family dinners, laughter, warmth. Now it was just me, the table bare except for my mug and the journal I'd carried through Europe. I opened it, my fingers tracing the words I'd written in Paris. I am Lillian, and I am enough. They'd felt bold then, a declaration of freedom. Here, in the villa's stark silence, they felt like a challenge. Enough for what? I'd taken back my home, but I needed more than walls to live for. I sipped the coffee, its bitterness sharp on my tongue, and let my mind wander. Europe had shown me glimpses of who I could be, a woman who laughed in cafes, who bought silk scarves, who stood before masterpieces and felt alive. I didn't want to lose her, but staying here, surrounded by ghosts, risked pulling me back into the old Lillian, the one who faded for others. I needed something new, something mine. An idea flickered, faint at first, then brighter, like a match catching flame. What if I turned this house into something more? I stood, the chair scraping against the floor, and walked to the living room. The space felt different now, not just because Sophie's lilies were gone, smashed in my moment of defiance, but because I saw it with new eyes. The high ceilings, the wide windows, the polished floors. They weren't just a home, they were a canvas. I imagined the room filled with people, not family, but strangers, friends, strangers who could become friends. I saw tables draped in white linen, candles flickering, the clink of glasses, the hum of conversation. Parties, gatherings, events. The villa could be a venue, a place where I created moments, not for Ethan or Sophie, but for myself, for others who craved connection. The idea grew, taking shape as I paced the room, my boots soft against the rug. I'd always loved hosting, even if it was just Sunday dinners for a family that took me for granted. But this would be different, elegant, intentional, a business. I could organize exclusive dinners, wine tastings, book readings, maybe even small concerts. The villa's grandeur, its sprawling garden, its history, they were assets, not burdens. And I had the skills, years of cooking, planning, making people feel at home. Why not turn my pain into profit, my loss into legacy? I grabbed my journal and started sketching ideas, my pen moving faster than it had in weeks. Menus, roasted lamb with rosemary, tiramisu dusted with cocoa, wines paired to perfection. Themes, literary evenings, jazz nights, garden parties under string lights. I imagined Martha helping me, her laughter filling the house, her practicality balancing my dreams. The thought of her brought a smile, a warmth that pushed back the villa's chill. I texted her, "Come over, I have an idea." Her reply was instant. "On my way, you'd better have coffee." While I waited, I walked through the house, seeing it anew. The dining room could seat 20, the patio could hold a small band. I touched the banister, its wood smooth under my palm, and remembered the day we'd moved in, how I'd envisioned a life of love here. That dream was gone, but a new one was forming. I paused at the mantel, still bare, and made a mental note to hang new photos, ones of me, of this new chapter. The villa wasn't a cage anymore, it was a stage. Martha arrived, her red sedan crunching gravel in the driveway. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room, then me. "You look different," she said, her voice curious. "What's going on?" I poured her coffee and told her everything. The deed, the confrontation, the emptiness, and now the plan. Her face lit up, her laugh echoing off the walls. "Lillian, this is brilliant," she said, grabbing my journal to read my notes. "You're not just taking back your house, you're taking back your life." We spent the afternoon planning, her practicality grounding my enthusiasm. She suggested starting small, a dinner party for local influencers, a way to build buzz. I nodded, my mind racing with possibilities. By evening, we'd drafted a guest list, a menu, a date. I felt alive, purposeful, in a way I hadn't since Paris. The villa hummed with potential, its silence no longer oppressive but expectant. The phone buzzed again, Ethan's name flashing like a ghost from a life I'd left behind. I stood in my villa, now alive with the hum of my new venture, and ignored the call. Word was spreading. Ethan was jobless, Sophie had vanished, and Ryan's dreams were crumbling. They'd tried to bury me, but now they were the ones falling apart. Did they really think I'd save them after all they'd done? I didn't answer, not out of spite, but because I owed them nothing. It was a few weeks after my first dinner party, on a brisk afternoon when the villa glowed with new purpose. The villa was alive, its rooms filled with the scent of roasted garlic and rosemary from the kitchen, where I was preparing for tonight's event, a wine tasting for a dozen local tastemakers. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the crystal glasses I'd set out, each one sparkling like a promise. The garden hummed with the buzz of a hired string quartet tuning their instruments, their notes drifting through the open patio doors. I smoothed my dress, a tailored navy piece I'd bought last week, and felt a surge of pride. This was my world now, built from the ashes of the life I'd reclaimed. But why did the past keep trying to claw its way back? The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. My first dinner party had been a quiet success, the guests' laughter and praise lingering in the villa long after they'd gone. Word spread quickly. Lillian Harper's events were the talk of the town, exclusive, elegant, unforgettable. I'd booked more gatherings, each one bigger, bolder. The villa was no longer a mausoleum of memories, it was a beacon, drawing people who saw me, not as Ethan's wife or Ryan's stepmother, but as Lillian, the woman who created magic. Yet even as I built this new life, whispers of the old one reached me, carried on the wind like ash. I first heard the rumors at the market, where I'd gone to select cheeses for tonight's tasting. The vendor, a chatty woman with flour-dusted hands, leaned in as she wrapped my order. "Heard about your ex-husband, Lillian?" she said, her voice low. "Ethan's out of work. They say he's been drinking, holed up in some run-down apartment." I'd nodded, my face neutral, but my stomach twisted. Ethan, the man who'd once commanded boardrooms, reduced to this? I pushed the thought away, focusing on the weight of the cheese in my hands, its sharp scent grounding me. Later, a neighbor mentioned Sophie. "She's gone, you know," he said, pruning his hedges as I passed by. "Took off after Ethan lost his job. Left him high and dry." I'd murmured something polite, but inside a grim satisfaction stirred. Sophie, with her silk blouses and calculated smiles, had built her throne on my pain. Now it seemed her empire was crumbling. I pictured her packing her bags, her bracelet glinting as she fled, and felt a flicker of justice. She'd chosen her path. Let her walk it. Ryan's fall came through a mutual acquaintance, a caterer I'd hired for my events. "That stepson of yours," she said, chopping herbs in my kitchen, "tried to start some tech venture. Went bust before it even launched. He's back to square one, begging for loans." I'd stirred the sauce simmering on the stove, the wooden spoon steady in my hand, and said nothing. Ryan, who'd smirked as Sophie locked me out, was learning the cost of his choices. I felt no pity, only a quiet resolve to keep moving forward. Now, as I arranged charcuterie boards in the dining room, my phone buzzed on the counter. Ethan's name flashed, the third call this week. I stared at it, the screen glowing in the soft light, and let it go to voicemail. He'd left messages before, rambling, slurred pleas for me to talk, just talk. I hadn't listened to them all, deleting most before they finished. Sophie's number had appeared once, a curt text. "We need to meet." I'd ignored it. Ryan hadn't reached out, but I knew he would, eventually. They always did when the ground gave way beneath them. I set a wedge of brie on the board, its creamy edge catching the light, and thought of the villa as it had been, cold, silent, theirs. Now it was warm, vibrant, mine. The contrast was stark, a reminder of how far I'd come. I'd turned pain into power, betrayal into beauty. But as I adjusted a sprig of thyme, Ethan's call lingered in my mind, an unwelcome ghost. Why was he reaching out now? I pushed the question aside, focusing on the task at hand, the clink of glasses as I placed them on the table. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Martha, her arms full of flowers for the centerpiece. "You're a vision, Lillian," she said, her eyes twinkling as she took in my dress. "This place is a dream," I smiled, helping her arrange the peonies, their petals soft as whispers. We chatted about the evening, but my thoughts kept drifting to Ethan's call. Martha noticed, her brow furrowing. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down a vase. I hesitated, then told her about the rumors, the calls. She snorted, tossing a peony stem into the trash. "Let them rot," she said, her voice fierce. "They made their beds, Lillian. You don't owe them a thing." Her words were a balm, but they didn't erase the unease. I nodded, forcing a smile, and we finished setting up, the villa ready for its guests. As the first attendees arrived, their laughter filling the room, I felt the weight of my new life settle around me. The quartet played, the wine flowed, and I moved among the crowd, a gracious host, a woman in command. But when my phone buzzed again, tucked in my pocket, I didn't check it. Ethan, Sophie, Ryan, they were shadows now, fading in the light of what I'd built. I raised a glass to toast the evening, my voice clear, my heart steady. Ryan stood in my doorway, his eyes hollow, his arrogance gone. "I'm sorry, Lillian," he said, his voice breaking, a shadow of the boy I'd raised. Behind him, the villa glowed with my new life, a world he'd tried to steal. I wanted to shut the door, to erase him like he'd erased me. But then I thought of his children, my grandchildren. Could I turn my back on them, even if I wanted nothing to do with him? I didn't open the door wider, not to forgive, but to protect what mattered. It was a quiet afternoon, a month after the villa became a beacon of my new ventures, when Ryan came knocking. The villa was calm, its usual bustle paused in the soft light of late afternoon. I stood in the foyer, arranging a bouquet of lavender Martha had brought, their scent sharp and soothing. The house smelled of wax polish and fresh linens, a testament to the life I'd built, elegant, purposeful, mine. The windows were open, letting in a breeze that rustled the curtains, carrying the faint chatter of birds in the garden. I was preparing for tomorrow's book club, my first, and the stack of novels on the dining table felt like a promise of new connections. Was this what peace felt like? Then the doorbell rang, a sharp chime that cut through the stillness. I wiped my hands on a cloth and opened the door, expecting Martha or a delivery. Instead, Ryan stood there, his shoulders hunched, his face gaunt under the porch light. His hair was unkempt, his jacket wrinkled, a far cry from the polished young man who'd smirked as Sophie locked me out. His eyes met mine, heavy with something I hadn't seen in years, regret. My heart tightened, a mix of anger and pity, but I kept my face neutral. What did he want now? "Lillian," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Can we talk?" He shifted, his hands shoved deep in his pockets as if bracing for rejection. I stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, not inviting him in. The villa behind me was my sanctuary, and he was no longer welcome here, but his expression, raw and broken, stirred memories of the boy who'd clung to me after nightmares, the teenager I'd cheered at soccer games. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who'd betrayed me. Still, I nodded, stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind me. "What do you want, Ryan?" I asked, my voice steady, though my pulse quickened. The air was cool, the garden's roses swaying in the breeze, their petals a vivid red against the fading light. He looked down, scuffing his shoe against the stone, then back at me, his eyes glistening. "I messed up," he said, his words tumbling out. "I was wrong. About Sophie, about you, about everything. I'm sorry, Lillian. I need your help." I crossed my arms, the lavender's scent clinging to my fingers. Help? After he'd stood by while Sophie threw me out, after he'd chosen her over me? I remembered his smirk, his silence, the way he'd turned his back on the woman who'd raised him. My anger flared, but I kept it leashed, my voice cold. "You need my help? Why now, Ryan? Because your business failed? Because Sophie's gone and Ethan's a wreck? You didn't need me when you locked me out of my own home." He flinched, his face crumpling. "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "I was stupid, caught up in Sophie's promises. She made it sound like you were holding us back. I believed her. I was wrong." He took a step closer, his hands out, pleading. "I've got nothing left, Lillian. My kids, they're struggling. I can't even pay for their school supplies. I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for them." The mention of his children, my grandchildren, hit me like a wave. I pictured their faces, their wide eyes, their laughter from years ago when I'd baked them cookies. They were innocent, caught in the wreckage of their father's choices. My heart softened, but only a fraction. I studied Ryan, searching for sincerity, for the boy I'd loved. He looked broken, but I'd been broken too, and he hadn't cared then. Could I trust him now? I took a breath, the breeze cooling my skin. "What exactly are you asking for?" I said, my tone measured. He hesitated, then spoke, his words careful. "Money," he admitted. "Just enough to get by, to take care of the kids. I'll pay you back, I swear." His eyes were desperate, but I saw a flicker of the old Ryan, the one who'd always expected me to fix things. I stepped back, my hand on the doorknob, the villa's warmth beckoning. "I'll help," I said, my voice firm. "But not for you, for your children. I'll pay for their school, their clothes, whatever they need, but it goes directly to them, not through you. And you don't get to come back here, Ryan. You don't get to be family again." His face fell, a mix of relief and shame, but he nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick. "I don't deserve this." I didn't respond, just opened the door and stepped inside, pausing to look at him one last time. "You're right," I said. "You don't." I closed the door, the click final, and leaned against it, my heart pounding. The lavender bouquet sat on the foyer table, its scent steadying me. I'd done the right thing, for the children, not for Ryan. But the encounter left a shadow, a reminder of the ties I couldn't fully sever. The villa sparkled under 1,000 fairy lights, laughter and music spilling into the night. I stood in the garden, a glass of champagne in hand, surrounded by friends who saw me. Not the wife, not the mother, but Lillian, unbroken. I'd fought for this moment, clawed my way back from betrayal. But as the stars shone above, I wondered, was this freedom worth everything I'd lost? I raised my glass, not to forget, but to celebrate the woman I'd become. It was the last night of the year, under a velvet sky, when the villa hosted its grandest party yet. The garden was a dream, aglow with strings of fairy lights woven through the roses, their golden flicker dancing on the petals. The air carried the scent of jasmine and grilled figs, mingling with the crisp tang of champagne. Tables draped in ivory linen dotted the lawn, each adorned with candles and bouquets of lavender, their flames steady in the cool night. A jazz trio played on the patio, their saxophone weaving a sultry melody that wrapped the evening in warmth. I stood at the garden's edge, my silk dress catching the breeze, a glass of champagne chilled in my hand. The villa, once a cage, was now a beacon, and tonight it celebrated me. Was this what triumph felt like? The year-end party was my boldest event yet, a gathering of friends, clients, and new faces drawn by the villa's growing reputation. Guests mingled, their laughter rising like bubbles, their voices a symphony of stories and dreams. I moved among them, a gracious host, my smile genuine but hard-won. Months ago I'd been locked out of this very house, cast aside by Ethan, Sophie, and Ryan. Now I was the heart of this night, the woman who'd turned betrayal into brilliance. The contrast was dizzying, a reminder of how far I'd come. I paused by a table, adjusting a napkin, and caught Martha's eye across the lawn. She raised her glass, her silver hair gleaming under the lights, her grin as mischievous as ever. She'd been my rock, my co-conspirator, helping me transform the villa into a haven for gatherings like this. I nodded back, warmth spreading through me. This is what family feels like. Not blood, but choice. I sipped my champagne, its bubbles sharp and bright, and let the moment sink in. The trio shifted to a slower tune, and I found a quiet spot near the roses, their scent grounding me. I thought of the journey that had brought me here, the pain of Sophie's ultimatum, the shock of the changed locks, the power of the deed in my hand. I remembered Paris, the Seine's silver glow, the woman I'd begun to rediscover. Each step had been a battle, each victory a stitch in the tapestry of this new life. I touched a rose, its petals soft, and felt a pang of gratitude. I'd survived. More than that, I'd thrived. A guest, Clara from my Paris tour group, approached, her Australian accent warm. "Lillian, this is magical," she said, gesturing to the garden. "You've created something extraordinary." I smiled, thanking her, but her words stirred a memory. In Paris, she'd seen me staring at the Mona Lisa, unraveling myself. Now, she saw me whole. I invited her to join me at the main table, where Martha and other friends waited. As we sat, the conversation turned to stories, triumphs, losses, second chances. I took a breath, the night air cool against my skin, and shared my own. "A year ago, I was invisible," I said, my voice steady, carrying over the music. "My family, my husband, my stepson, his wife, pushed me out of this house thinking I'd fade away. They changed the locks, threw out my things, told me I didn't belong." The guests leaned in, their faces a mix of shock and empathy. "But I didn't fade," I continued, my hand tightening on my glass. "I fought back. I reclaimed this villa because it was mine, always mine, and I turned it into this, a place of joy, of connection, of life." Martha clapped, her eyes shining, and the table erupted in applause. "To Lillian," she called, raising her glass. The others joined, their voices a chorus of support. I blinked back tears, not of sadness but of pride. I'd told my story, not to dwell on the pain, but to honor the strength it had forged. The jazz trio swelled and the party continued, the garden alive with dance and laughter. The villa stood proud under the morning sun, its roses blooming brighter than ever. I walked through its rooms, no longer haunted by betrayal, but filled with purpose. I'd turned my pain into power, my home into a haven. But as I opened my journal to a fresh page, a new question stirred in my heart. What would I write next in this story of mine? I didn't pause, not to dwell, but to embrace the future unfolding before me. It was the first morning of the new year, with the villa bathed in light and possibility. The villa glowed in the morning sun, its stone walls warm under a sky so blue it seemed to hum with promise. I stood in the garden, a mug of coffee steaming in my hands, the scent of roasted beans mingling with the sweet tang of blooming roses. The air was crisp, carrying the faint chirp of sparrows and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. The fairy lights from last night's party still hung, their bulbs dull now, but a reminder of the joy that had filled this place. I touched a rose, its petals velvet against my fingertips, and smiled. This was my home, my life, and I was ready for what came next. Last night's celebration had been a triumph, a declaration of my freedom. The villa had pulsed with music, laughter, and the warmth of people who saw me for who I was. Lillian, the woman who'd rebuilt herself from the ruins of betrayal. I'd stood among them, no longer the disregarded matriarch, but a creator, a host, a force. The memory of their applause, their raised glasses, lingered like a melody. Yet as I sipped my coffee, I felt a quiet shift. The past was behind me, Ethan's downfall, Sophie's flight, Ryan's regret, but the future was a blank page, and I held the pen. I walked inside, the wood floors cool under my bare feet, and settled at the dining table. My journal lay open, its pages filled with fragments of my journey. Paris's cobblestone streets, the deed's bold ink, the villa's transformation. I picked up my pen, its weight familiar, and stared at the empty page. What did I want now? The question wasn't daunting but exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a new world. I'd reclaimed my home, built a thriving business, and found a chosen family in Martha and my new friends. But there was more to discover, more to become. The phone buzzed, and I glanced at it, expecting Martha's usual morning text. Instead, it was an email from Clara, the Australian from my Paris tour. "Lillian," it read, "your party was unforgettable. I'm starting a travel group for women reinventing themselves. Want to lead a tour with me? Italy, maybe Greece. You'd be perfect." I leaned back, a laugh escaping me, soft and surprised. Italy's sun-drenched hills, Greece's turquoise seas, they called to me just as Paris had. The idea sparked, bright and bold. Could I take my story on the road, inspire others as I'd inspired myself? I set the phone down and wrote in my journal, a new adventure, not running away, but running toward, helping others find their strength, their freedom. The words flowed, each one a commitment to keep growing. I imagined leading women through ancient streets, sharing my story, showing them they could rise from their own betrayals. The villa would remain my anchor, its events a steady rhythm, but I could stretch beyond its walls, carry my light further. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Martha stood there, a basket of muffins in her arms, her grin wide. "Thought you'd need fuel after last night," she said, stepping inside. I poured her coffee, and we sat, the muffins warm and crumbly between us. I told her about Clara's offer, my voice alive with possibility. Her eyes lit up. "Lillian, you're unstoppable," she said, squeezing my hand. "Do it. The villa's yours. This life is yours, and the world's waiting." We planned as we ate, sketching out ideas for the travel group, the villa's next events, even a mentorship program for local women starting businesses. The dining room filled with our laughter, the sunlight painting the walls gold. I glanced at the mantel where I'd hung new photos, me in Paris, Martha and me at the first dinner party, the garden under last night's lights. They weren't just memories, they were proof of a life reclaimed. As Martha left, promising to return for tonight's quiet dinner, just us, a chance to rest, I walked to the garden again. The roses stood tall, their colors vivid, no longer wilting. I thought of Ryan's children, the school fees I'd paid, the boundary I'd set. I thought of Ethan and Sophie, their lives unraveling while mine flourished. I felt no guilt, only a steady peace. They'd made their choices and I'd made mine.